Good evening, everyone. I'm James Rattray. I'm the chairman of the Soldiers of Killiecrankie group. We're a local constituted group focused on our battlefield here at Killiecrankie. I'm telling the story of the Battle of Killiecrankie. I'm using two accounts. This one here is by General Hugh McKay, commander of the Scottish Government Army, which is a William and Mary army supporting them. The other one is from Sir Ewan Cameron of Lochiel. He tells the Jacobite side, James the 7th Army, Bonnie Dundee's side's account. And the third book I'm using is The Art of Warfare in the Age of Marlborough. And this fills in all the gaps regarding infantry and tactics of that period. In the first 4 sessions we talked about who the two monarchs were and why they were fighting to control Scotland, who their commanders were, and the difference between the two Scottish armies, who won the race to the Castle of Blair, the Pass of Killiecrankie and its issues, how Dundee chose the battlefield and successfully manoeuvred General Hugh McKay there, and in the last session we talked about the 1680s warfare and weapons. This is the 5th session, and in this session we'll be following General Hugh McKay's account and how he organises his Scottish Government Army to oppose the Jacobites and the battle line he draws up. On Sunday we'll go up onto the high ground and we will have a look at the Highland Clan Army and how it organises itself on the day. In this 5th session, what I'd like to just start by showing you where we are. In terms of Scotland, this is Edinburgh, this is Glasgow, that's Inverness. We're right here in the middle of Scotland. Excellent area for touring, as I said the last time. If you're looking a bit closer, that's Blair Atholl, the Pass of Killiecrankie, and Pitlochry's this way, the Killiecrankie National Transit Centre, Soldiers Leap that many of you will know. This is the River Garry, the A9, which you'll see traffic running past us every now and again from where we stand. Up here is where the first filming session was. The second one was at the Pass of Killiecrankie. The third one was on this flat field where the baggage train was coming out of. The 4th and the 5th one were up here on the right wing of where the government army was stationed. I'd like to just say that Soldiers Leap is very well known, but the battlefield itself isn't, and one of the reasons for this is the battlefield's on private land. And as Soldiers of Killiecrankie, we've got to say a big thank you to the current owners of the estate, Daniel and Claire, who've been hugely supportive to us in all we do with our battlefield and our own events. Looking at this location, we're on the very right wing. It's the one bit of the battlefield where we get a good view of both sides, because the carriageway for the A9 is on our right hand side, and as you can see, but let me just do a twirl so you can see the whole scene around me. Behind us we've got the large hill with the Pass of Killiecrankie just below us. If I swing around even further, oops, we've got a whole lot of trees that have been planted on the battlefield, and we'll talk about those later. Keep swinging round. The Scottish Government Army was lined up in this direction, parallel with the road, and further round, this is the hill on which the clan regiments were lined up. The road was built through the battlefield in the 1970s and late 70s and 80s, and it divided the battlefield into two. Currently there are plans for dualling the battlefield, and we thought there was Scottish battlefield protection legislation to protect our battlefield. We woke up halfway through the process to realise that this legislation that was put in by our Scottish Government in 2011 failed to protect the battlefield. Basically what they're going to do is build everything on this side, which doesn't make sense. If this is the side where all the fighting and the men died, why are you trying to put a road over this important area of the battlefield. Maybe coronavirus will save the battlefield for us. There's certainly a drop in traffic. Now we've got lockdown. I suspect once lockdown is lifted, we'll continue to get a drop in traffic. And maybe the lack of money also will mean not so much money for roads. Only time will tell. What I'd like to do now is just go back to the last scene where we were on the flat field. The 1,200 horse of the baggage train was still coming out. General Hugh McKay had ordered his 6 battalions to march up the hill in front, which we're now standing on, I'm standing on. And this is the high ground. He didn't want the Jacobites to occupy this ground. And then Hastings Regiment, which will come and stand where we're standing now, and a troop of horse followed last of all. And I'm just going to mention to you, and I'll put the old hat on to remind you that I'm talking about the Scottish Government Commander, General Hugh McKay, and what he said. And what he said last time, he made his battalions march up the face of the hill, thereby preventing the enemy trapping his forces between the high ground and the river, which is down behind us there. And he got up the ground fair enough to receive the enemy, but not to attack them. So he's now up on this land. The Highland clans are up there. He's got a reasonable, he's telling us he's got a reasonable line at which to stand and defend, but he can't do much more than that. Again, Viscount Dundee, Bonnie Dundee, very successfully manoeuvred him into this position. Mackay tells us, having got up upon the land, he began to even his line, leaving a little distance betwixt each battalion, having made 2 of each. So he halved his battalions and left a gap between each half and a gap between each of the battalions. And he said because he wanted to fight 3 deep. In the session on Tuesday, we looked at European warfare, and they said the European armies fought 5 deep. And the reason for this was to allow for continuous rapid fire. If you think of it, at that time, 1 shot was fired every minute from your musket if you were good and efficient at loading it and reloading it. So 3 deep, Mackay had a very different plan for the Highland army. He himself was a Highlander, and he knew all about how they fought. He put only in the midst of the line, he left a greater opening where he placed his 2 troop of horse. So he drew up a very long line, straight line to oppose the Highlanders. And when the Highlanders approached, that the fire of the line should spend. So his thinking, by having it 3 deep and having a very thin line, was when the Highlanders approached, every single one of his muskets, the fire of the line will be spent. So what I'm going to do is just show you now the map. We're standing right here on the extreme right-hand side, and he drew a line. He told us that Louders was posted on a knoll, which is just up here, and he emphasized the importance of the line. I've shown 2 Balfours, 2 halves of Balfours ahead of the line, because Mackay tells us and talks to us about that. In the middle, you've got Arad House, and in front of that, you've got the 2 troop of horse. He left a gap in the middle of his line for that. The memorial cairn that some of you will know is over here. That's on boggy land that Mackay tells us about, which was no good for horse. So he insisted on a straight line. We're standing just in front of these trees here. So with all honesty, the Hastings Regiment are probably just 40 or 50 yards behind us here. The river Gurneg, or the Old Gurneg, is on the right-hand side. The Old Clune is on the left, and that's protecting the flanks of the army. We'll fill in where the Jacobites are on Sunday, so you can see that. This is the flat field where the baggage train is coming out of the pass. This is the village of Killiecrankie, the pass of Killiecrankie here. So the baggage train was coming out, 1,200 horses and mules. Hastings Regiment was the last to join. He marched up here and on to the right wing. So they're 3 deep. So he tells us to make his battalions fall out by the larger interval to flank the enemy either side. So he wanted to make sure he was well beyond the enemy on either side, so as not to expose his battalions to the enemy's horse. which was composed of gentlemen, reformed officers, and such as deserters of Dundee's regiments out of England. So from this I interpret that he thought the Jacobite cavalry, although it was small, was significant. He talks about the only English regiment that he had, and that was Hastings' regiment, the one that guarded the baggage train. And in the Art of Warfare in the Age of Marlborough, that book tells us William of Orange, and I quote, was horrified at the outdatedness and short supply of weapons in the English arsenals. And so obviously William didn't think much of the English army when he came over. But let's see what General Hugh McKay does. Hugh McKay tells us he also sent a detachment of firelocks from each battalion to the right to fortify Hastings' regiment, to whom he was obliged to leave at that post on the Scottish right wing. So Hastings' regiment didn't even have enough firelocks to fight. And from what Mackay is telling us here, he had to leave them on the right wing. You get the impression that he would have put them in reserve if he had enough forces, but he had nobody in reserve. He tells us as he was going along his line, organising everyone, he became a target. And again I quote, he, Mackay, was always in action, giving instruction to his troops as to where to stand. The enemy distinguished him, which drew the papping shot whenever he moved. Several of his men were wounded before the battle, he tells us. Papping shot, that's a new term. Mackay emphasises the importance of a straight line. He, Mackay, noticed that Lieutenant Balfour's battalion had advanced too far. I'm just going to go back to this map, and I showed him right on the end here, they'd marched too far ahead of his line, because he felt the line was crucial so that the Jacobite cavalry couldn't break them up. He took care not to surprise the enemy by the motion of bringing Balfour's battalion back in line with the rest of the army, in case they should be flanked on the left. So he was very keen not to be outflanked. He got the streams either side of him, on the left wing or on the right wing, protecting him. And he then said, he, Mackay, returned along the face of the line to the right, where he found all his battalions ready. So again, let's just picture coming back here. The impression I get was he brought Balfour's back, and then he rode along here and saw that all his regiments were ready. The cavalry were behind, the Jacobites are up here, which we'll talk about on Sunday. He returned here along the line to the right, where he found all his battalions ready to receive the enemy. And he tells us he then used the opportunity to make a speech. And he said he made a short speech to some of the battalions which stood nearest to him. He reminded them of the unquestionable justice of their cause, regarded not only the Protestant interest in Britain, but in all the world, which depended on the success of His Majesty's enterprise for the defence thereof, as well as the temporary happiness of their country, the maintenance of their laws, which lay upon them not to betray by criminal faint-heartedness. So he wanted them to be brave. And last of all, their own safety, assuring them that if they kept firm and close, they could quickly see their enemy take to the hills for their refuge. He also gave them a warning, but on the other hand, he warned them, if the Scottish government army happened to give way, as he should not expect, before that rabble of Highlanders, they might freely conclude few or none of them should escape those naked pursuers, who are far speedier of foot than they. Besides that, all the men of Athol were in arms, ready to strip and knock in the head of all the runaways. So he was warning them, to run away and not stand firm, you will certainly die. Whereas if you do stand firm together, there's a chance you might survive. And he advises to avoid certain ruin, the only visible mean of being safe was to stand to it, like men fighting for their religion and liberty against the invaders of both, which was the true ground of His Majesty's enterprise, and not the desire of a clan. So I suspect the people have said this speech helped to undermine some of the morale in his troops. Well, we'll see when the battle concludes how well they fought. Because a lot of these troops will have heard of the stories about the Highlanders with Montrose. They were in unfamiliar territory here in the Highlands. They wouldn't be used to terrain like this. And a lot of them were new recruits. Having given his speech, Mackay tells us the enemy seemed to extend their order beyond our right. So the enemy, we're on the right wing, they seem to move further over to the right. This they might be flanked. And the enemy get betwixt himself and the pass, which would be very dangerous for him. So he was concerned, the pass of Killiecrankie up behind us there, he didn't want the enemy to get in between there, because they could cut all communication betwixt us and Perth, from whence we expect 6 troop of horse and dragoons, as well as further supplies of provisions. He was ever hopeful that these extra horse would arrive and help turn the tables. And as we heard in the second session, the Highland War Council wanted to attack, Cameron of Lochiel wanted to attack the government army before they had all this horse. So the enemy, Dundee, had the initiative. He'd got him on the hill. Mackay admits he can't do much. He's got to sit here. And his last words for this evening is, Mackay tells us whatever his enemy's design or plan might have been, nothing more happened. And they stood and looked upon one another for at least 2 hours. And we'll leave it there. On Sunday, we'll join the Highland Clan army up on the hill, and I'll take you through their thinking, what Cameron of Lochiel tells us before the battle. And it'll give you a very different perspective. Just remember this scene. On Sunday, you get a very different perspective of the battlefield. Before I go, I'd like to thank you all for your comments, your likes, your shares, and I really appreciate your support. I hope you're slowly getting a picture of what's happening in it and seeing what's going on. So see you all on Sunday at 7 o'clock.